We've put our 1 Corinthians series on hold for July, and we're spending July looking at a short series called Just Give Me 15 Minutes. And today, just give me 15 minutes to explain who Jesus is. I hope that you'll be back each week in July. Next week, I'm going to explain why I'm not religious. The week after, why sad things happen to good people. And then at the end, to tell you that you are more loved than you ever dare hope. So will you give me 15 minutes over these next 4 weeks to bring these short presentations to you? I hope you will. This morning, give me 15 minutes to explain who Jesus is, and my time starts now. This commanding figure who changed the course of history, who changed our calendar, whose name people take on their lips in extraordinary ways, whose teaching is embedded in our history and our culture and our literature without people even realising, who is he? Mark is the name of the second of 4 accounts in the New Testament documents which have faithfully recorded Jesus' life. And he gets straight to the point in his opening verse. Have a look with me. Mark chapter 1, verse 1, the beginning of the good news about Jesus the Messiah, the Son of God. Now, Messiah means promised one, anointed one, the one who the nation of Israel were longing for to rescue them from foreign rule. But Son of God, what does Mark mean by saying Jesus is the Son of God? Well, the best way of doing that is by looking at different incidents in Mark's Gospel and trying from how we see Jesus at work and what we see Jesus doing to conclude something about what Son of God actually means for us. So let's start at chapter 1, verse 16, and we see that as Jesus walked beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will make you fishers of people." At once they left their nets and followed him. Wow, that's some pulling power, isn't it? Now, we understand they had met before. We see that in John's Gospel. But right now, when Jesus calls them, they drop everything. They walk away from the family business to be with Jesus. And then in the next verses, it happens again. Another fishing family, James and his brother John, also left their fishing business. And we see from the start that Jesus had this pulling power, this sense of awe about him that drew people to him. Let's say he had a commanding authority over people that people responded to, that they should take such radical steps to join Jesus on his mission, not to fish for fish, but to fish for people. Then when you look at another passage with me, just a few verses later, chapter 1, verses 21 and 28, I'll put it on the screen. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, Jesus went into the synagogue and began to teach. The people were amazed at his teaching because he taught them as one who had authority, not as the teachers of the law. Just then a man in their synagogue who was possessed by an evil spirit cried out, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." "Be quiet," said Jesus sternly. "Come out of him." The evil spirit shook the man violently and came out of him with a shriek. They were all so amazed, and they asked each other, "What is this? A new teaching and with authority. He even gives orders to evil spirits, and they obey him." News about him spread quickly over the whole region of Galilee. Well, there are 2 things I want you to note here. First, when Jesus came on the scene, there was a great prevalence and a greater awareness of the powers of evil than perhaps there is today for us. In Western culture, we don't see it that often, though in some Asian and African cultures, they see it, every day. And the evidence of it is dark and harmful, and it creates all sorts of superstitions and is very destructive. So while this story about Jesus commanding an evil spirit to come out is a little unusual for us, it would not have been surprising at the time. What is surprising, though, is the definitive way Jesus intervenes. Note that the evil spirit makes a claim about Jesus' identity. Verse 24, "I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But then Jesus ignores this and simply says, "Be quiet, come out of him." And the evil spirit shook the man violently and came out of him with a shriek. Now that is staggering. That would have been unheard of, and they would have stood there gobsmacked. But equally gobsmacking was their reaction to the way Jesus taught in this passage. Verse 22, they were amazed at his teaching because he taught them as one who had authority, not as their teachers of the law. Jesus taught like he knew what he was talking about. And the teachers of the law, well, all they did was quote previous rabbis. Jesus, however, got up and said, "I say to you." They'd never heard anything like that before. It was clear, it was compelling, it was intriguing, it was life-giving. See their response at the end of the passage? The people were all so amazed that they asked each other, "What is this? A new teaching and with authority. He gives orders to evil spirits and they obey him." News about him spread quickly over the whole region of Galilee, and you can understand why. So we're putting together here a picture of this Jesus. He has authority. Authority over people. Come, follow me. Over evil spirits. Come out. Authority as a teacher. I say to you. Now let me ask you, have you ever tried to get someone in a wheelchair through a crowd where there's loads of people and it's all tight? This is pre-COVID, of course. And it's very hard to get someone to the other side of the crowd where you want to go, to the other side of an arena or a showground, etc., when the crowds are so tight. That's something of the scene in this next incident I want to show you from Mark chapter 2. I'm not going to read that passage to you now. You might have heard me read it before. But Jesus has come to a kind of a home base at Capernaum, and word is spreading. He attracts crowds wherever he goes. People come to him from everywhere, and as soon as the word is out that he's at home, people throng to the place. He preaches, and people love it, and more come. Some men come who have a mate who can't walk. They try to get him through the crowd to Jesus because they've heard of Jesus healing people just like him. He's not in a wheelchair, he's on a stretcher. They're determined, though, to get help to their mate. So determined that they go up on the roof, there's probably stairs up the side, and they begin digging a hole through the roof of the house where Jesus is. Can you imagine? Jesus is talking, he feels something perhaps falling on his shoulder, and he looks up and a hole is developing in the roof. Such a substantive hole that they can lower the man down on the mat right in front of Jesus. Well, they must be good mates. I'm not sure how the owner of the house felt at this point. But they work this way of lowering the man on the mat, and he's there right in front of Jesus' eyes. You can imagine the people that have let him down. They're looking down from above and they're saying, "Well, what's going to happen now? Let's see." Full of expectation, full of hope, proud of the way that they've got him to Jesus. And what does Jesus say? "Son, your sins are forgiven." You can imagine the reaction of the men up there. They're calling down and saying, "No, excuse me, Jesus. That's very nice about forgiveness and everything, but he can't walk. We want you to help him to walk. There's been some misunderstanding." Why does Jesus mention his forgiveness right at this point? Two things for us to note. Jesus is actually pointing out that forgiveness is this man's greatest need. Yes, he can't walk, and that has all sorts of social implications at that time, but his greatest need is for his sins to be forgiven, because that's everyone's greatest need. That's your greatest need. That's my greatest need. You don't want to be turning up face to face with God at the end of time unforgiven. That is for sure. The second thing to say about this is, who does Jesus think he is going around declaring forgiveness? That's quite presumptuous, isn't it? And the teachers of the law, they picked this up. They weren't impressed. Did you notice what they said? "Why does this fellow talk like this? He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone. And you know what? They were absolutely right. Only God can declare forgiveness in the way Jesus did here. What is this telling us about who Jesus is? But you see, how would you ever know that sins have been forgiven? You don't change colour or anything like that. There's no visible sign of forgiveness of sins. So Jesus does something here to demonstrate his power. He tells the man, get up. Get up, take your mat and go home. And I love the next verse. It's so understated. He got up, took his mat and walked out in full view of them all. What? Well, he doesn't need rehab or physio or a page of exercises. He is completely and utterly and wonderfully healed. He just gets up and walks out. So our picture of who Jesus is building, you see. He has authority over people, come. He has authority over evil, go. He has authority as a teacher, I say to you. He has authority to forgive sins, your sins are forgiven. And he has authority to heal, get up. What do you make of that? Let me tell you about a lady who had been sick for 12 years and a little girl who was 12 years old. It's over in Mark chapter 5. One of the rulers of the synagogue named Jairus fell at Jesus' feet, desperately anxious for his little girl who was dying. Jesus agrees to help and sets out with Jairus, but he's suddenly interrupted. A woman who had been suffering from bleeding for 12 years, and women watching this will know more about that, what that means than I do. And she was determined just to get to Jesus, just to touch his clothes in the hope that some of his power would rub off and that she would be healed. She got close enough just to touch the tip. And right at that moment, she knew that something had changed. She stopped bleeding and she felt in herself that she was free from her suffering and from the social isolation and religious isolation that she had known for all that time. Jesus drew her out in conversation and assured her that she was indeed healed because of her faith. But in the time all that had happened, bad news, dreadful news. Jairus' daughter is dead. And someone had come from Jairus' house and brought word telling him not to bother Jesus anymore. The assumption was, now that she was dead, there was nothing more Jesus could do. Jesus thought otherwise and told Jairus simply to trust him. So he turned up at Jairus' house. Everyone, understandably, is distraught. But Jesus took command. He took the little girl's mum and dad, along with 3 of the closest disciples, and went into where the girl was laid out, and simply and wonderfully took her by the hand and said to her, "Little girl, get up." What was going to happen? You can imagine mum and dad watching on anxiously. Did she slightly move? Is something happening? Well, they didn't have to wait long because Mark tells us that immediately she stood up and walked around. And they were absolutely astounded. And we see in this beautiful account, again, Jesus' authority to heal and restore, his authority over illness with the woman, but significantly here, his authority that reaches right down to the dead, his authority to raise the dead. Yes, Jesus has authority over people, come, over evil, go. As a teacher, I say to you, to forgive sins. Authority over illness, be gone. Authority over death. Little girl, I say to you, get up. What do you make of all of that? Elsewhere, we see his authority in nature as he calms a storm with a word of his mouth, and he multiplies one family's picnic so that it feeds thousands. And as he walks on water and opens blind eyes and unstops deaf ears. And I want to put it to you that Jesus has all the authority that you'd expect God to have if he turned up in person. Jesus is God visiting this planet. That's who he is. People often say to me, well, Mark, I'd believe in God if he just turned up. And I always say, well, he did. And we have the eyewitness accounts in his word. He turned up for you. He turned up so you can know he's for real. He turned up to call you back into relationship with him and to do everything to make that possible. He turned up to live the perfect life that you can't live and die the death that you deserve. He turned up to meet you at your greatest point of need, to make possible your forgiveness through his death and resurrection. What will you do about Jesus? About God having turned up? If God turned up right now, you'd be certain to take notice. It would be magnificent and humbling and awe-inspiring and wonderful. God did turn up. And it was magnificent and humbling and awe-inspiring and wonderful. Many watching today already know him and know him well and love him dearly. But if you don't, today's the day to start a journey of return or discovery. And I would love to help you, or people at your church would love to help you on that path of discovery, so that you might see with crystal clear clarity who Jesus is and what the appropriate response will be. Who is Jesus? Son of God. God turned up in person. He came for you. C.S. Lewis said, this is either true and therefore very important, or false and therefore of no importance. The one thing it cannot be is of moderate importance. Our loving Father,